Yehudis Fletcher was an Orthodox Jewish wife and mother, and a secret lesbian. Born into a strict religious family, she endured two unhappy marriages, knowing she was attracted to women. She's now written a memoir about her struggle to be herself. Yehudis Fletcher, good afternoon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for being with us. Look, you're the daughter of a rabbi. Tell us about your upbringing. How strict was it and where was it?
So I grew up in Glasgow, and we had a kind of slightly atypical, really religious life because we lived in this very religious bubble. But my father, he used to call them his parishioners. So the community that he ministered to were not living as strict a life. So I think I had slightly more exposure than other children did. But for example, my education took place in some of the classes was in a boiler cupboard. One of them was in a cloakroom, and they were usually in various rooms on the top of synagogues around Glasgow, and sometimes in people's living rooms as well.
Well, what a pleasure to be speaking to a Scottish Jew that I'm not related to. It doesn't happen very often. Look, at what point during your childhood did you get the feeling that you didn't quite fit the mould that was being set for you?
So first of all, I never ever fit the mold. Like as soon as I have memories, those are memories of me questioning. So being a lesbian is kind of almost by the way. It's just part of the ways in which I don't fit in. And I think the biggest way in which I've never fitted in is that I've always questioned what's expected of me. And that's how I open the book with this scene when I'm 6 years old and questioning whether or not a God exists and then testing him.
Mm-hmm. Now, look, you've said your memoir is a hopeful response. What do you mean by that, a hopeful response?
So it's a really funny book, right? There's a kind of genre of quite sad stories, or they might be called misery lit, where people tell their exit stories. These are the terrible things that happened to me. This is how I came through, and this is how I've left that all behind me, and this is how I'm living wonderfully now. And that's really not my book at all. This is a story of staying. This is about being able to hold on to the joy that I love about Judaism, about being a Haredi woman, about being able to bring up my children rooted in their own heritage, and at the same time being able to choose with informed choice about which parts I no longer think are helpful or in fact are harmful.
Tell us what it's like coming out in that sort of community. When did you start coming out to people? Who was the first person you told? What was the response?
I told people sort of very early on. I mean, the first person I told was my mother. I was 17, and she was very brief. She just said, "No, you're not," and then that was the end of that conversation. And then I got married the next year to a man. But then later on, I don't ever really remember having proper conversations with my close friends, but it was kind of acknowledged that I am both. I am both married to a man in this very strict community, and also I am attracted to women, and that was something that I discussed with my close friends. I remember having a discussion at one point online on Facebook, and I had a close friend who I knew would be in that thread, and I wanted to post something about it. And so before I did, I messaged her directly and I said, we've never discussed this openly, so I just want you to know that I'm going to say this. And she's like, oh, of course, of course I knew that about you. So actually my close friends, we did have that language and discussion, but we didn't conceptualize it in the same way as being able to it wasn't a case of, oh, if you're a lesbian, then that means that you can have a life and fall in love with a woman and grow old together. We saw it as sort of a function of maybe attraction, and then that had to be managed within a whole other sort of expectations of what you do with attraction. If your whole life is about doing the right thing and doing what's expected of you, and being a woman means producing and supporting, so producing children and supporting the men around you, then just because you're attracted to women doesn't then automatically translate into, oh, I'm going to live my life as a lesbian.
And did you have, I mean, it's almost certainly the wrong word in the context, but some kind of epiphany that made you realize that you didn't want to live like this anymore?
Yeah, I definitely had a sort of a process of smaller epiphanies, I think. Definitely meeting somebody from who I knew from my childhood, who was out as intersex and bisexual, finding her online, speaking about that online, is what led to the two of us getting together. And then, of course, like in true millennial fashion, starting a Facebook group together. And then that from starting that online conversation and then going to meet with other the people, the members of the group online, that kind of was part of it. And then also there was a very significant part of my life that was also about Mumsnet and realizing, so I logged onto Mumsnet and I found people on there who taught me about consent, and that if I did have this other life that I wanted to live, that was one part of the question. But the other part of the question was I didn't need to sleep with a man that I wasn't attracted to and didn't want to have sex with. And that was kind of a separate epiphany for me.
Sure. Look, you played a crucial role in bringing the notorious Haredi paedophile Todros Grindhouse to justice. You were ignored when you initially spoke up about that abuse. Can you talk us through that process, the process you went through when this first came to light?
Sure. Well, I had been trying to get, I'd say it's less about justice. It was about making my community safe. I'd been trying to keep my community safe from Todros Greenhouse from about 6 months after he stopped abusing me. So I was raising the alarm absolutely everywhere I possibly could. And in the book, I talk about the reaction from the Beth Din here in Manchester, but there were other people that I also spoke to. And I did that
I'm sorry to interrupt. How old were you at this point?
So when I first started raising the alarm, I was 16 and a half, probably.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carry on. Sorry.
So I kept on trying to raise that alarm. And the difficulty is, as a woman within Jewish law, I'm not a legal person, right? So somebody could have empathy with my struggle or even on a cerebral level believe what I'm saying. But within the construct of Jewish law, the Beth Din, that is the Jewish religious courts, didn't have capacity to include my testimony or take action on the basis of it. It wasn't until much later, so I was 25, I had 3 children, that a report was made by someone else to the police, and then the police contacted me and said, would I like to be part of, would I want to support that investigation? And I did. And then 2 years till that came to court. And in the space of those 2 years, there was all sorts. So he was bailed and then he fled to Israel and then had to be extradited. But eventually he was brought back, and going to court was an absolute life-changing experience for me. And I'm not saying that it was easy. It was incredibly difficult. But just being in that space, going into the environment that actually was so similar to a synagogue. So it was in Minchell Street. It was one of those old courtrooms, all that wood paneling, that feeling of decorum, somebody sitting right up at the top. But this time I was included, and my testimony was part of what was being considered. And it wasn't about whether or not this would end in conviction. It was just that I was being listened to, and for the very first time in my life, I think, being considered a legal person.
Yeah.
And after that, I came off the stand and I just thought, this is it. This is Pandora's box that's been opened, and I'm never getting back into that box ever again.
Tell me a bit about how secrets and indeed how abuse work in that kind of closed community. How widespread is abuse? Do people know about abuse and it's just not spoken about? What's the dynamic that you were fighting against?
Yeah. So since my abuse, I've been able to do research and been able to understand a lot more about how this phenomenon works, and I've written about it as well. There isn't great evidence that says that there is more sexual abuse within Haredi communities or indeed Jewish communities than other communities. But what we do have is a construction of sexual abuse in which it's perceived not as harm, but as a sin. Now, a sin is resolved between a person and maybe their rabbi or their maker, right? So if you view sexual abuse as a sin, then the way you deal with it is going to be very, very different to how you view it as if, going around chopping little children's legs off. And what that results in a community that is a haven for abusers, a community where abusers don't suffer the same lack of social status that they might in other places, a community where just because you're a paedophile doesn't mean, you wouldn't suffer any kind of, there might be some condemnation from some people, but you just don't suffer that same embarrassment. And the things that really matter in terms of social capital within the community, Are you going to be able to marry off your children? Will you get honors in the synagogue? My abuser was arrested in March, and for the following High Holy Days, he was allowed to leave the services in synagogue as a kind of mark of respect. So I think that gives some indication of why the risks are so high.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've been cut off by quite a lot of your family, yet you remain a member of an Orthodox Jewish community. Tell us, finally, tell us a bit about why you chose to remain within that community and how you're treated within that community.
Two very different things. So I basically refused to leave. It's mainly because I like it here. This is my community. I know how it works. This is my heritage. I write in the book, I cannot unsubscribe from the taste of my soul. I don't want to be somewhere else. And then coming to the second part of your question, how do people treat me? Well, some people treat me nicely and some people don't treat me nicely. I really believe in people's capacity to do more than they're doing right now. And I've really seen that if you believe in that and you connect with people having an acceptance of people's limitations, but also believing in their capacity to do even more if they can, it really comes back to meet you. And I've really kept so many wonderful friends, and living in the heart of the community also is just a logistical thing. Like, I don't use, for example, in the way that I observe Jewish law, means that I need certain things within my sort of geographical location, right? So I need to live within the community to have access to kosher shops, to be able to get to the synagogue, for the children to be able to get to school, etc. And having done that, having stayed, I feel like I've changed the topography of the community so that it now includes me, and people get used to that.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Yehudis Fletcher, author and activist and author of Chutzpah, a memoir of faith, sexuality and daring to stay, which is out now. Great to speak to you.